video part first and get that thing recording, and then on Audacity. Okay, there we go. Hello, fellow Philosophes, and welcome to Knowing You Know Nothing. This is episode number 43, and it is the only podcast for this week. This is an exciting episode for me personally because we're getting to do what I've been wanting to do for a while, which is a roundtable discussion. This one will not have the same format that most of our other podcasts do, because we usually will do a quote for the first segment for the first 30 minutes and then move on to a list of questions. Instead, a roundtable is about getting several guests on, some new, some that have been here for a while, and just tossing up one philosophical question and just seeing how much we can exhaust it and really get as much out of it as we possibly can. Just a few house cleaning things as usual. We've had our new logo for about 2 months now. That was a former student of me and Mr. Davis in the chat, and that was Kirsten Binkley. Kirsten Binkley designed that new logo with my ugly head on there, and I'm really proud of that, and she did a great job of designing that. Looking ahead to next week, we're going to do another movie. We're going to do the movie No Country for Old Men, and I'll have independent film critic on, Eric Harris, as usual. We've done The Truman Show. We've done the movie Unforgiven. I'm really excited for that. We're going to have Cody Watkins on the show, too, as well, which I'm sure Letha Page is extremely excited about. So we're going to have him on as well, and then that should be a really good episode. And then other than that, that's kind of how we're looking forward. I'm going to have a couple of philosophers on sometime in August as well to do a spotlight episode. But other than that, about once a month or once every 2 months, we'll do a roundtable discussion, and it's just doing one question, and I'm just going to toss it up like a jump ball in basketball and really get the whole podcast going. I'm also honored because I have my twin brother, because you're not crazy, you see my twin brother Ben Malcolmson is on here as well, which I think this is the first time one of my former students, Elena, has ever met my twin brother, so it must be really creepy to actually see this, but it's really cool to have this experience. For if some of you don't know, my brother Ben and I have a sports podcast over the Indiana Hoosiers called Hoosier Heartland. We both were born and raised in Indiana, and that means a lot to us too, so having Ben on for that is fantastic. Another guest to introduce to the show, she's been on quite a few episodes. She's actually been on the most episodes, and that is Letha Page. So I'm really glad to have her on. And then a few other people, or one other person that's been on the show a couple of times already, means a lot to me, is also Bill Murphy. Bill Murphy is close to me and Ben over the Hoosier Heartland podcast, and it means a lot to me to have him on. So to do a little bit of an introduction, because it's their first 2 times on the show, hopefully not their last time, and hopefully the show goes smooth. I'll introduce the gentleman first. So Nathan Davis is joining us, another fellow educator. Nathan, I think this is your first podcast you've ever done, but I just want to know, how does it feel to be on the show?
Like I said, it feels good, and getting ready for the podcast debut tonight. So
yeah,
very excited.
Yeah, I'm excited to see, people like my brother and Letha going after you, and just to see how you hold yourself on in this. I have no doubt that you'll do fine. And then Elena Hollums, this is her first show. She's another group member that's on the Facebook group page, which you can join on there as well. And she often comments, and not just comments, but comments in a very detailed way. And I never see anybody ever argue with Elena. That's what always blows me away, because when she answers, she tries to cover as many bases as she can, very similar to Letha's arguments through things. And I rarely see anybody other than myself say something back to her reply. So I really wanted to get her on a podcast as soon as I could. So Elena, it's great to have you on the show. How's it feel to be on your first podcast?
It's exciting. I'm hoping to be able to learn some stuff here.
Well, I hope you do too, and hopefully that I have no doubt that you'll be giving us new ways to think about things going into it as well. So last week I was on another podcast. A couple of former students of mine have a podcast called The Movie Brothers, and we did a classic movie back when Bill was a little tyke. So we did a movie. We did a movie famous from 1957, and I don't know if Bill can remember this movie. It's listed as one of the top 10 movies of all time. Do you know what one I'm talking about, Bill?
I'm not sure. Go ahead and tell me.
With the movie 12 Angry Men. And this movie is a phenomenal film, and it's also been done in plays. It's in a book as well. It's a really good one, but Letha and I were discussing about that film. We watched it together this last weekend, and being on the podcast, well, I realized after watching a few videos and doing some research, the main philosophical question with that movie is, what is the value of a human life? Because there is an 18-year-old young man on trial for murdering his father, even though his father was abusive. And that's pretty much what the whole movie is tied into. And I thought, what better roundtable discussion than to do something like that? You also have just such a very difficult year 2020's already been, with so many other situations socially, through the pandemic, through all these other issues. I think this is a perfect question to really hit on top of that service. So I have no doubt that whether it's being a student, a professional, all of you will definitely bring in new insights to this question, and I just hope to learn a little bit from you. So here's the discussion question. This is all we're going to do. I'm going to toss it up. The question for the night is, what is the value of a human life?
Okay, Ben. Ben, can you define value?
Ooh. See, right out of the gate, I thought Letha would go after me. It wouldn't take very long. Well,
I just want someone to define it so that we have a more, I guess, level-headed, like, where we're going with this conversation.
Don't you think? Go ahead, Ben.
Oh, I was just going to say, as far as value goes in general, I think it has to be something that is it's a step forward, and whatever that would be. It'd be something positive, something proactive. Again, probably not the greatest definition of it, but when I hear the word value, I think it's something that is constructive in that nature.
I think
Okay.
when we looked at value, that we're saying what is important, something of importance to us or to society. And so an individual might have a different value placed on something as opposed to the other individual or society, and different cultures are going to place importance on or value on different things or different customs, or in this case, life.
I think that's a great point coming in. Is when you ask the first question of saying what's the definition really of value, is the definition differently for the individual compared to the group, or is it and kind of vice versa? Should there be a single definition based on the group or just individuals of the group? So that's a
Are
great
you
point.
saying that values are subjective?
Absolutely.
I totally agree. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add to what Nathan was saying there, or in the responses. I think Bill hit the nail on the head as far as importance goes. As far as Nathan goes, I don't think you can make a standard view of what value is in this conversation of all the people that's in here. Each of us see value in something totally different. And that could be something material. It could be something that's non-material. Like I said, Robbie and I've kind of had this conversation earlier on the phone as well. So just my 2 cents.
Elena, is that how you say your name?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, what's your opinion?
As far as value goes, I think it does have a different meaning for everybody. But I think value can be good and bad, but it's still like some things might have kind of a more negative, I guess, might cause more negative feelings towards them, but it doesn't mean they have any less value. The negative can still be of value somewhere in your life. It doesn't always have to be something good or something that really helps you move forward. It can be, it can still be of value, even if it's more painful to, I guess, see or know about.
So are you saying that, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So are you saying, I just want to know, are you saying that value always has to be good and bad?
No, I think it can be either, and it can, like, value doesn't really have to be either. It can be one of those things, or it doesn't really have to be either of them.
Okay, I got it. So it can be neutral as well.
Yeah, I think in response to Elena's comments, it makes me think of in the action of doing something valuable to you, or something that has value could have a negative reaction on someone around you, in that sense being good and bad. I kind of want to ask a good example, because I have a good story I can say, but I want to ask the group this question first, is can anybody give an example of a situation where you can value somebody, but also devalue them at the same time.
Oh yeah. Sorry, I want someone else to go because I feel like I've been talking a lot.
I mean, I think you could do that at the same time of just, you really, really care about that person, or maybe their actions, or maybe their decision making on an action is not the same as yours. So you take into account that you do value that individual, but you might not value their actions at that given time. That's kind of maybe an example, maybe possibly that I was thinking about.
Bill, did you have any thoughts?
Yeah, let's look at this historically. I know some of you guys are going to enjoy that, but let's look at this historically, and let's go to 1945. And we are a country that, for the most part, values human life. We're involved in a war, and we are involved with a war with Japan. And Harry S. Truman has to make a decision whether or not to drop the atomic bomb. Now, his quote was that you break your head and your heart trying to save one soldier's life. So he makes the drastic decision that he is going to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and he is going to wipe out many human lives to try to save American human lives. Now, here you have both the positive and the negative. So it's a great example of a value being both positive and negative, and it's going to be positive and negative depending on your outlook on your specific feelings and where you're at, your culture at the time.
Bill, I like that spin on the history side, and that is just fitting for you, especially with our our relationship from your podcast shows as well. I thought I had an example of a situation I wanted to share, but it also made me think of another situation because we all have full-time jobs and so on. And an example, because of the current climate, obviously the COVID-19 pandemic, in my employment, which is manufacturing, the company people like us, including the floor employees, for example, of value and devalue, is we're all having to wear masks right now. That's a mandatory zero tolerance policy thing. We have actually lost people, good people, to just refusing to wear the mask. But in that essence, you're doing something that is technically a sacrifice in a way, but it's for the greater good of the people that work there, for their safety and so on. But at the same time, it's not environment control. Whatever it feels outside, it's 10 times hotter in there. So you're working in triple digit heat index environments and hard to breathe. So it's like you think of an individual safety, but you're thinking of the safety of the greater good. And that's what we always come back to. That's an example I had, but can I have just one more example that I could add in there real quick? And again, I can make this quick. I know I'm a Malcolmson and we talk a lot, but I can make this quick. Think of how, Robbie, we talked about this before too, that human beings in general are just not meant to be alone. So we're all always striving for some kind of connection. Now on the relationship side of things, I can think of a good situation where you're valuing somebody and still devaluing them at the same time. I thought about this earlier, was like if you were had interest in somebody that like, say, for the opposite sex or same sex, depending on your preference, and then you chose to make a move on that person, for example, like you decided to kiss them without really asking for their permission. To me, that's a way of you valuing them, but at the same time, you're technically devaluing them because you see value in their physical appearance, the attraction side, but at the same time, you didn't respectfully ask for that physical interaction. You didn't say, hey, can I give you a kiss, or hey, can I give you a hug, something like that. That was an example I thought of being able to value and devalue someone at the same time. Anybody have any thoughts on those scenarios?
Your scenarios are much nicer than mine.
I'm not gonna lie to you, I've never had like a guy back whenever I was dating sorry, Robbie, but I've never had a guy like actually ask me if they can kiss me. Like, so I give you that one, but I've never actually had someone be like, so can I kiss you now or whatever. Honestly, if someone would have asked me that, I'd be like, no, like immediately, because I'd be like, why are you asking me?
Yeah, but see, you're also talking about a personal experience. Now, let me ask you this though: could that same feeling or the way you feel about that situation, do you think that other people in general share that same mentality, or is that different per individual?
Before I answer that, your question was actually in a personal way too. So with you saying value,
Yeah.
so I
Good point.
don't know what you were meaning by
Ben?
that, but
Ben,
sorry, go
I'll
ahead,
jump
Bill.
in here a second. And I think part of that, Ben was flashing back to my age and my time. And Ben, you know, that was something that back in the dark ages when I was dating, that we might have asked because it was the polite thing to do. And the girl actually would have expected you to ask permission. So I think, again, we're bridging different cultures here and different time periods.
Okay, so if we're gonna talk, I don't mean like this I'm just trying to just say it. So Ben, he said, do you agree with what he said?
You're referring to Bill's comments?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I like
You do?
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then why did Robbie not ask me? You're twins.
Because we're two totally different people, even though we're twins.
Because he has no values. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, well,
Those are
I
not
think
core
that-
values, Letha. Get off your high horse.
I think that just things are valued differently now. I think that in a way, Letha's got a point. Like, I think things that are spontaneous or might be in some ways valued in the romantic sense differently today than in what they were in the past.
Well, here, let me. I think me and Letha's going to go back and forth on that. I want to ask her this question. So, in the scenario that you had, and maybe you gave this example, if Robbie were to ask you for a kiss in that scenario, would you have said no and then just completely been off put?
Stop bringing me in on it.
In a certain, like in that situation, the way that he kissed me first, probably, I don't know what I would have done. I think I would have questioned like what he was doing, because so he kissed me after a scavenger hunt, and like on the scavengers list it said do something that you're afraid of. And that's, I don't think he would have said, so there's something I'm afraid of and it is to kiss you. Can I kiss you? I think I'd have been like, what? Why are you, that's not spontaneous. Like, I don't know. That's just me though in that situation. But next time, I guess, sometimes he asks me, but I don't know. Anyway, Elena, how are you doing? I do have a question for you, Elena. I really hope that you have a really good answer, because I'm really excited to hear your thoughts on this, because I did see the comments on the post, like on Knowing You Know Nothing Facebook page, and I find you very bright. So I did want to ask you is, do you think there is even a value to human life? Like, does human life even have value?
I think it definitely has value. I think the value can be different depending on who you are as to how much you value certain human life. I think you run into the problem of with the executions and stuff. How much do you value a human life if you're willing to kill it? Or during war, how much can you really say you value a life when you're willing to go to war and kill other people? But at the same time, I think it comes back to what, I guess, how you see value. Because some people would see those lives as not being of the same value as someone who's not been to prison or not committed murder or some other terrorism or war crime. So I think the value is really different based on the person, and it all kind of falls back into what your definition of value really is.
Why
Elena?
do you, sorry,
No, I was just going to say, Elena, that's a really good point, and it's a point that's
Mhm.
been debated for years when in terms of capital punishment, whether or not, you know, taking a life for someone who's taken a life, it is that justified, or are we contradicting what we actually are saying, that life is very, very important, but we're going to take your life because it's not as important or as a punishment. So your point is a really good point.
I think to overall discussion, you can look back at the topic and say, do we as individuals, do we put numbers with what we decide, the justification behind it? And just going back to the topic, if somebody takes a life, does the idea come back to, do we take that life because of that? So I think we as individuals, we do put numbers or try to justify our own reasoning with the numbers of what we do, and try to make it, I think, a simpler thinking for us to justify ourselves, to say that we're doing the right thing or the wrong thing.
Nathan, why do you think that, like, it's valued more, like comparing to numbers? Why? What makes it like value more?
I think one is, I guess, being a numbers person, putting everything in numbers makes it easier for us to think about it. We don't put emotion with numbers. So we think as individuals possibly that if we put, justify ourselves with this number to this number, that I guess the big really topic goes back to emotion. Does your emotion drive what you think, or does emotion take over that? But if we put it to a number category, we can possibly tell ourselves to take that all emotion on what we think and say, all right, it's one of those things that's clear. It's this number's here, this number's here. So we try to make it simpler through our brain and also logically to tell us and our reasoning.
Hey Nathan, can I ask you a question? Since I thought you made some good points there, and I was thinking, and it's more of just tell me if I'm kind of in the ballpark or not. But when you talked about numbers, does that help a person kind of separate that emotional decisive factor from a thing? It adds more logic to a certain situation. Would you agree on that?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, you put stuff, because again, emotion for a human being can go in any direction at any given point, and you can jump from one end to the other in a split second, I believe, with emotion. Um, but with the numbers wise, I think numbers kind of organize our thinking, which gives I guess you want to call it organization of our emotion. Where do we want to take our emotion to? So that's kind of behind all that.
Nathan, I have a follow-up question for you and Ben both. I like the way that you took the logical route. I even forgot to mention that as one of the avenues for argument, but using logic is a great philosophical argument, as like I said to you in the chat. But Ben brought up emotion. I think that maybe it's important for us to define a boundary line or a ceiling somewhere. Nathan, you're right. The logic does break things down a little bit more. It gets rid of some of like the messiness, and it's easier for us to resort to that. As Ben said, emotions do get involved because we're humans. So I guess what I ask you as a follow-up, Nathan, is how much logic should be used before you cross some type of a moral boundary into being inhumane? Because you do want to think logically, but sometimes we could do something that makes logical sense, but for some people on the other end, they might see that as immoral or unethical because it's hurting other people or something in the regard. So I guess where would that boundary line be between balancing emotional and like the humane part and the logical part? Or can they be one and the same?
It's one of those things where I answer that question with the question, to where, when you think logically is based on the environment that you're in or what you live by. Definitely what you grew up with, the internal standpoint, either spiritual, possibly. But with all that being said, logically, where is that line? Is that line drawn for every individual at the same exact rate? But if it's to that, I think every logical line can be different for every single human being. But that goes back to the process of, you have your own thoughts, you have your own emotion, you have your own as a human being. So that's kind of one of those questions with the, answer with the question is, I don't think there's not one logical line that you can draw, because it can be different for every single person.
Love that. Nathan, I was thinking on top of that too, just because you talk about the numbers kind of guy. I thought Letha was going to ask something there. Letha, did you have something? Okay, I just want to make sure. I didn't want to
Nah, I
interrupt.
was just, my face was response to Robbie's post in the chat. I was like,
Okay.
I was just thinking that. Anyway, keep going.
It's like you guys are just. I won't go there. But no, anyways, Nathan, about you on the numbers side. Again, I mentioned you talked about the logical side. I really find that fascinating because, again, all of us have full-time jobs. Even like Elena, for you, Robbie being your teacher at one time. Still, even the teaching career, the schools, it's still technically in a way kind of a business. But like for me, manufacturing is also considered a business. So they make a lot of decisions based on what they would call logical. And then you start getting into the political side of that thing. Sometimes that gets really muddy. You see decisions made that are basically based off logic, but it could be more beneficial for only a handful of people instead of the greater good of the company, for example. But I think more of my question for you, Nathan, is can you see that that also applying to other areas besides just on a personal level, but like on a business level? Can you really see that kind of shining through?
Oh, most definitely. And I could tell you could do numbers with anything you want, but you also have to understand with numbers that there's, even though we subjectively put numbers as a meaning, but for every person, a number can mean something totally different. I think it goes back to, of how we go through this, what value of life that we go through there. It's based on what you know, what you've been taught, what you've, just the whole environment that you've been raised in. That, okay, say two of in a business format for manufacturing, that means that. Even though it could be to a different person, it could mean something totally different. So, you could, numbers is very subjective because you can make any number you want a meaning to it, and that goes back to everything what I've kind of said.
I like what you're saying, Nathan, and I have the advantage of seeing things change over time and go back to the value of a human life. And when we're talking about capital punishment, it has over my lifetime, I have seen capital punishment be accepted, and then I have seen that it was declared unconstitutional because it was cruel and unusual punishment. And then I've seen where this type of capital punishment is accepted, whether it was an electric chair or whether it was lethal injection. And so the value of life and how we've controlled life has changed. So I think that looking at the value of life, that it is continually changing over the years as to how we're going to accept it, what we're going to say is important and what isn't important. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Bill, I have a follow-up for you just to build
Sure.
off of that. So 2 questions. I'll ask the first one that Letha and I were discussing in the chat a little bit on earlier. And that is, Ben and Nathan were trying to decide really where's this ceiling between emotion and logic. And I'd said in the chat that I think maybe this is where maybe theology or religion may help give that objective guidance, because we brought up the word subjective or relevant earlier.
Right.
But when it comes to things like the value of human life, I would think sometimes or somewhere there needs to be an objective way. But Bill, you have much more knowledge and experience in religion and especially religious doctrine than I do. Would that be fair to say? Could you share with us, would religion be the right route for the majority of people in society to take when it comes to knowing really how to determine the value of a human life?
Well, Robbie, I think that's a really good point. And I think that our Judeo-Christian background in the United States plays a big part in how we value human life and how we look at punishment, how we look at trying to save human life. I mean, that's sprinkled throughout our entire justice system and entire theology as we go through that, whether it's with abortion, or whether it's with capital punishment, whether it's with right to life, whether it is, it even goes into your right to choose the fact that you want to die with dignity, as opposed to suffering in an incurable disease that is going to take you at some point in time. So yes, our religion is going to play a significant role in how we look at all of these things.
And
I hope
see, Bill,
that helps.
I asked that, Bill, just because I fear, and I'll let you go here in a second, just Ben, that I fear that individuals can be secular or maybe atheist or agnostic, but I worry about an entire society and millions of people to be convinced to only rely on reason or rationalism, because without the religion, which has given humanity a moral compass throughout human history, I don't know how the value of humanity would change. I mean, I would say many people in society today that are secular may think, well, society would probably be better with value if we got rid of religions. But I don't know. I don't think that it would be as easy, as clean as what many of them thinks it would be. And that's coming from a secular person. I'm a secular individual, and even I am worried about that. And Ben, I'm sorry to take for you. I do want to you get a chance to kind of say what you wanted to say too.
No, it was kind of the same topic there because Bill mentioned religion in there, and that made me think of a good question for the group. And I'm kind of curious. And Bill, I'll throw this back at you first to see what you think. But
Okay.
Nathan was talking about numbers earlier and it made me think of it having a logical impact on your decision making. But in your opinion, and I'm sure the whole group can probably also comment on this as well, is there other forms of what people would consider as contributing to a logical decision? Like when you say religion, I think there's also decisions that happen based on value, people using faith as an example of what they feel is a logical decision to them, like their strong faith might make them feel like it's a logical choice to do this action that either values them or the people around it. Would you agree on that there can be other forms besides just numbers?
Oh, absolutely.
Whether fair or unfair. I mean, I'm not saying that's right. I'm just whether fair or unfair.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it's kind of interesting that we did this little twist on religion versus value, because I think if you are looking at your religious faith, then it's going to give you a certain value based on your denomination or the type of religion that you experience. And it doesn't have to be Judeo-Christian. It can be Islamic. It can be Hinduism. We can run the gamut as far as that's concerned. But what's really interesting is that mankind and humankind, let me get this better. Humankind is probably, we're talking about value here. And if you are a person that does not subscribe to some sort of religion, you're still going to have values. And so I think that religion and values are going to intersect from time to time, if that makes sense.
Can I ask a question on top of that to Elena? Because with her being more of the younger generation, I think that she might have some good thoughts to this. Because Elena, you're correct me if I'm wrong. Is she into her first year of college now, or?
I'm in my third year of college.
Third year of college, okay. Well, since you're closer to your high school days, and there's things that me and Robbie and all of us can't remember from those days that well, but I remember just even being back younger then too. You have the world just feels smaller back when you're in high school, so influences around you can also dictate your decision making. And I'm kind of curious on that whole difference on value. Like, you don't have to use the personal example because I don't mean to pry, but can you also agree possibly that the environment and the people that you're around whenever you're back in high school or junior high, that it also, there was times where you would catch yourself making a decision that you felt was based on logic, but it had more of a decision based on influence of others around you. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think that with that, especially when you're from when you grew up in like in a small town, because I mean the elementary school that I came from, just going from there to the high school was a big culture shock for me. That was when I first got into actually meeting people who had different who had different religious beliefs, and either had religious beliefs or didn't have any, and I think that affected my worldview, and even my thing of the difference between value, what I value and what someone else would value. And I think even then, when you jump from high school then to college, it was that there was a big difference between the two values, because I went from a fairly conservative high school to an extremely liberal college, and my degree was very, very liberal, and I was like, I had no idea how to interact with that. So it was a learning curve that you either learn to you either learned from it, or you pretty much dropped out. Those were really your only options from that. So I think it can be both beneficial, and having those small town values and what you learned there, that you really didn't have to use your own logic on, because that's what everybody believed, so it had to be true. But it can also be hindering as to when you get out into the world, you kind of realize that you were very closed-minded back there, and you have to come back and see that there are other views, and there are you have to start thinking, you have to start using logic at that point.
Elena, I just have a follow-up for you and Letha. Actually, I'll start with you, but I want to ask the same question to both of you. I know you had mentioned before, the college you attend now is still typically more of a liberal school. I know that with Letha going to California originally, with the college that she was at, I would say it's probably more liberal influence as well. And I loved that question I've been asked you, because that's something that I've always wanted to ask you too, after being gone for 3 years, is how has your value changed? Or like Bill said, values plural. How has all that changed? And you had mentioned, I guess we started with the religious aspect. I know this is going to sound political. I don't mean it to only be a political side, Elena. But I guess what I want to know is, after being out for 3 years, after being around so many different kinds of people, so many different kinds of ideas, and some of them are dissenting from what you were taught whenever you were younger. It doesn't mean with what you were younger is necessarily wrong, but you have to consider all of those now. And now you're in your early 20s. Could you look back and say, in a fair way, that your values religiously, politically, socially, they have evolved since then? And I'll start with you first, Elena.
Yeah, I think they've evolved some. I think some of them have just kind of become more steadfast, as that's maybe like I know I've researched a lot more on what my beliefs were, and had to really think as to where I stand on certain issues versus where everyone else stands. And you learn a lot when you go to because I'm in a social work program, so that's a very, very liberal program, very big on social justice, and I had to learn what my values were in order to do that. So it did require a lot of research and a lot of logic and thinking from me, just to see, do I believe what they're telling me I should believe, or do I go against it and believe whatever I originally believed, or something new, something entirely different. And I think with some things, I became more steadfast on what my original beliefs were, just from the research. And then in other ways, I did change with some of my beliefs did evolve and become more open-minded about how I view people and their different beliefs, and more of how to accept other people, even if you don't always agree on all the same things. You can still, be friends with them. You can still talk to them and treat them like they're human beings, even when you don't agree on everything. And I think I had to learn that a lot faster than I really maybe wanted to learn it going into college. But I think it became very useful going in as to knowing what I believed and not having to completely change for them, but still accepting that there were differences and that I needed to at least look into those differences to see where I stood.
Elena, your answer was great, and I'll go to Letha next, but I just want to say it's weird because in a way, like you said, you were thrown into some new information and changes, maybe even faster than what you were ready for. But as Mr. Davis and I told you all in high school, the world doesn't wait up for you. Like it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks sometimes. And you brought up an interesting existential kind of crisis question. And in a way, it's, do you believe what you previously did when you came into school, or do you change based off of what you've learned? And you know as well as I do, not everything that you're learning is necessarily steadfast either or worth changing for. Some of what you've had before is still very valuable and you should still believe it. But it is weird though, Elena, because you're around all these new people, all these new ideas, and a lot of your previous ideas are being challenged even more than they did before. And that's kind of what Mr. Davis and I were really trying to get you all ready for through high school. It's just that, as you know, looking back, Elena, 18-year-old Elena might have heard us say that and went, yeah, right, okay, whatever. But whenever, after now living it for 3 years, you know what we were talking about. But I think that all of us were kind of like that in high school. You think that this is as big as the world's going to get, is like this close, and it just opens up so much. But Elena, I loved your answer because I think so many of us go through that existential crisis. So Letha, over to you too, just because you grew up in Logan County, Kentucky, Sameville area, relatively conservative area, relatively religious area too. And then of course, the other half of your family strongly tied to California, and you go out there. Did you have a similar experience to Elena, and did a lot of your values in life become challenged or even maybe even changed?
Okay. You say a kind of religious area. This is the Bible Belt. It is very, very religious. Everyone here is like either Catholic or whatever, or Baptist or whatever. A lot of people here are Catholic and Baptist, especially in this town. So I grew up in a Baptist church. I grew up this little honky tonk, but I wasn't really like into it. I was this little scene girl that didn't know her way. But anyway, so when I moved away, I had this idea, not really an idea. I didn't really know it was coming, but I wasn't as open to other people's thought process as I am now. After becoming a teacher myself, a lot of things changed. I questioned my religion a lot and drifted apart from what it was. Originally, I was a Baptist, but now I'm just like, I don't know, so it's hard. But in that aspect, it was hard for me to now, instead of go with what everyone wants me to be, to being my own self, my own identity. My family was really adamant on me like getting an education and everything, but with that education comes with questioning what was before, what's going to happen after, and everything else. So I started my own ideas on how things should be, and it also put into retrospect on what was actually important to me in my life. Before, of course, family is a big thing for me. Like, it's always been a big impact on my life. I keep saying big, but it's always been a huge impact on my life. My family is my everything. But then I sit back and I'm like, other people have families too. Their families are their everything too. And what's important to me is also important to them, but in their own eyes. And then it comes into thinking, well, I can impact them like in a way that I might not be able to do that at home. So that helped me to venture out to going to Washington and actually getting a little bit of an insight on how that up there, I guess, culture-wise was. And even that opened me up because it kind of reminded me of back home, and then a little bit reminded me also of living in such a big city in San Diego. So it was kind of like right in the middle. It was a little bit of a religious town. I did work at a very religious company there, and I worked at a Lutheran daycare who considered themselves to be a Christian daycare. And I questioned that. Like, even then, like, I would question my boss. I'd be like, but you're Lutheran, but you're Christian. Like, I didn't understand that. But because I just was never really exposed to it. So it even helped me there. But a lot of things that I've done in my life up to this point, I know I'm still living and I'm still very young, but I'm still open up to more ideas now than what I was when I was younger. I'm not, I more so question other people's own thoughts rather than trying to give them my 2 cents. I try to actually get down and understand how they're thinking, or what revolves around whatever ideas that they have. And I get to that point where I'm like, oh, but why, but how, but all that stuff. So that's just me, though.
And kind of just, kind of feeding off of great responses, by the way, past 2 there. It kind of brings up a topic just within my head, and kind of bring back that whole topic. Is there, what is the value of life? And when you say, Elena is saying you're going through high school, then you go to college, and you kind of, both of you kind of responding with when I went, going through school, that you start to learn more. Your interest of different things have maybe went up, starting learning more. Is the value of life different? So basically the questions I'm asking is this: the value or the life that you had in high school, does that have the same value as the value you would have going through school and college, or even after college?
Listening to everyone, and you've made tremendous points. The one thing I hear being said is that we all have different values. And for us to get along as a society, for us to function in a way that we are moving forward and being compatible in a society, we have to not only understand our values, but we have to understand and respect our neighbors' values. So that to me is, and I'm using the word value too much, but that to me is what's really, really valuable. That I understand my values, I understand where I'm going, I understand your values, I understand where you're going, and that we should both respect each other's values. And where there's conflict there, we need to talk it out and work it out to where we mutually can agree that this is the path we're going to take. And that's just what I hear everybody saying.
Great points, Bill. And Nathan, I liked your question a lot. I think before my comment, I do want to stress that it's going to sound like my response is what I would say some people would call the standard or the cookie cutter, what society would view things as. And I think the best way to answer your question, Nathan, is that there are 2 totally different value systems from the time that you're in high school or below that, compared to being a full-blown adult and you're out of college and you're going into whatever next chapter of your life is in. But as a kid, and I think Letha, it was one of the episodes you had recently when you were talking about your time as a teacher, and I think you made the comment, I want to say it was around the age of 2 or 3, you were talking about a child would have more of like an egotistical type of mentality because they don't fully understand their impact and their thoughts on what they're doing or whatever. But in a cookie cutter kind of standard approach, you're typically grown to evolve over time in that. And I want to say, imagining myself in high school, from my experience, there's foundational values that were instilled in me and Robbie as kids, that we just general values. But then once you get into the high school, again, kind of a standard way, you're still learning and developing those, but at the same time, you kind of have that tug of war within yourself where you're wanting to carve your own path, and at the same time still stay on the straight and narrow, if that makes any sense. But then once you go out of college, then to me anyways, your values broaden. Like you broaden again based on knowing what your actions are going to do, and then the reaction on top of that. I think my values in a sense felt more personal driven back in high school or before college, but then after college, my values have matured more in the sense that I feel more selfless decisions than I do have something that might benefit me more. I think of more like if I make a decision at work, it's for the best of the team. If I make a decision on our podcast show, it's for the best of me, Robbie, and Kathy, for example. So those are just some examples there. I know I kind of rambled for a little bit, but Nathan, since you asked the question, what's your thoughts on some of the responses so far?
Yeah, I mean, I really to go to the, responses of, different levels of, what you're thinking, what you're portraying, really. Just from personal experience, from what I thought in high school and then moving to a 7-hour trip to find a job, from where I live at now to where I lived at before, there was different thoughts. There was different, really values of life. Really, you think about it, of what we really demonstrate, what we say that is. So I think overall, from personal experience, as I got older, is you learn from that past, of what you went through. You decide what you went through, the environment you went through, and then as you portray what you think what was valued, because really you as an individual can only determine what you value. And it's either through education, environment, whatever you need to go through. But I can tell you, I guess if you want to call it a more mature individual, there's always stuff that you want to change in the past. So maybe, of those instances that maybe it changed what your future is, and maybe put more value to life of what you want to change. So it was just a question that I wanted to implement in, is just saying, is the value of life the journey, or is the value of life just the set point of the date and say, this is what changed me? And that's kind of what my whole thinking behind that. I think it's a journey and of what your value, and just it goes back to the start of the podcast. We could say your journey could be good or bad. It's just that journey that as you go through there. So
I don't think there is any value to life.
Jeez, Letha.
I'm just saying, like, if we think about it, though, if humans, let's say human life, if humans were never here, like, if humans were never here at all, the world would keep spinning. No one would, like, the animals aren't going to care. Plants are still going to do their own thing. Like, in all reality, I don't think that there is any kind of value in human life except for our own and our own species. So, sorry, my dog is whining in the background. You can probably hear her.
Aren't you contradicting yourself, though? Because you're okay, without humanity, I understand value may not exist, at least in the way that we consciously perceive it. But like you had just mentioned, we are here, though. Like, since we are here, value is a conception that humanity, we measure it up to ourselves. So for the sake of argument, since we are here, I guess that's what I'm getting into is, the question is, what is the value of a human life, instead of like being the earth. So since the humans are here, I guess that's what we're trying to determine is, are you saying that in reality there is no value? Yeah, they don't have any value, but yet we all live our life as though there's things that are valuable in it. So I want to ask you as a follow-up, what gives us value? Then we do see things as valuable. So what is giving it to us?
Education, like, I think that is something that might provide value for someone. Like, let's say if we're talking about the value of someone over another, I think education and experience is something. But also, if we're going to think of it in a religious aspect, God said that we were all created equally. So there is no one who's overvalued than anyone else. So to me, even in that aspect, I think that there's no value in people.
Well, Letha, though, isn't equally still a value?
Yeah.
Not if it's all the same.
Well, no, you're looking
Yeah,
at
what do
value
you-
being greater or less than, but if I label
That's
all of
what-
us as equal, it's still a label of some type of value. Sorry, Bill,
But-
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, no, I was
Sorry.
just going to add, no, I thought I love the discussion here. I just thought that in what was being said that everybody has value instead of saying, I mean, and you can look at it either way. Instead of saying no one has value, I would say that everyone has value, and that's where we're coming from.
Can I jump in too? Because Letha, I'm just curious if I'm in the ballpark at all. But like whenever you said that initial comment about human life not having value, I think if you just take that and try to make an initial immediate reaction off, you're thinking, like I say, I made the joking sense of saying, "Geez, Letha," like that's like would be an emotional knee jerk reaction, but. Whenever Robbie was, which I love the banter between you and Robbie, but I love the conversation too. But again, what I'm getting from you, Letha, and I'm trying not to make it sound too personal touch on it,
Oh, it's fine.
is in the grand scheme of things, technically you're right, Letha, but that doesn't mean that we don't strive to have some type of importance or value in our lives. Like I can say, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, eventually I'm not going to be here anymore. And many, many years, many more times, there'll be people after me, or like you said, there could be a day where humankind doesn't exist and there'll be a world of just of different creatures and things like that out there. But I think the big point I got from that is you identified that, but it doesn't mean that you don't strive to make something of what you're living, like your time on this earth as it is. It's like you're kind of like you're given this opportunity, and like this is kind of how it is, cut and dry. But I'm going to make the most of it. Am I kind of in the ballpark at all?
Kind of, but not exactly what I was thinking. So yes, everyone has different values. Of course, there's things that I value. I'm not saying that there isn't anything that I don't value. I'm saying that in aspects of humanity, like do are just humans valuable, or is human life valuable? And I don't think it is, because I think that the world could keep spinning later on. Now, Robbie was saying earlier that value is like greater or lesser and stuff like that. But if we think back to the Bible, if you are religious, if anyone here who is religious, I'm personally not, but I'm not denying it either. But mainly what I'm trying to say is that God said that we were all created equally. And if we're all created equally, then what is their value? If we're all equal, then the value of somebody, like, of course, someone's valued for being, let's say, a doctor, or back in like a blacksmith or whatever. Like, of course, those people have values, but they're all kind of like at that same level. That's what like equally is, right? Then why I don't think that anyone is really valuable.
I think what you're changing up here is trying to think how to say this, but I think everyone is of value. Now, I'm not saying that anyone is more valuable, and I think what you're saying, what I hear you saying is that none of us are valuable because we're all equal in the eyes of God. Is
Yeah.
that what you're saying? And I understand that, but you can't tell me, if we're using the term value, you and I are also going to, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but you and I are both going to value certain people. Like, you could never convince me that my little 3-year-old and 2-year-old grandsons are not of value, because they're of extreme
no.
value to me.
But I'm not
And-
trying to say that they aren't
Oh, I know
valuable.
you- I
That's
know
not
you're
what
not.
I'm saying.
I know
I'm
you're
saying
not.
human
but-
life in
Right.
general.
I know what you're saying, that human life in general is not valuable, but then I'm saying that I would place human life as being very valuable with people around me, the people I'm talking to tonight, So I think we're on the same page, just going about it a different way.
So what I had said earlier was that humans are only valuable to other humans, or things are only valuable to humans. But it's more so of, in the grand scheme of things, I do not believe that human life has any value, but except to other people.
Right. And I think that makes sense. That does make sense, but it's kind of like saying, it's kind of like saying, is the refrigerator light on when you shut the door or not? You know what I'm saying there?
No.
Okay. What I hear you saying is that human life isn't valuable except to other humans, but if you take other humans out of the equation, then human life has no value.
There wouldn't be value at all.
Right. What I'm saying is that does a tree make a sound in the forest when it falls and no one's there? What I'm saying is that human life has value because we are here.
God.
So
Also, Bill,
it
that
has to
builds
have
off of
value because we're here.
Yeah, and Bill, that builds off of an interesting argument Elena and I were discussing, based off of Friedrich Nietzsche, the famous German philosopher from the 1800s. In a way, when you said the refrigerator light or the tree falling, he criticizes that human beings, and he says man, but he means all human beings have a tendency, like Letha's getting at, that we only give value to things that we can see. Like
Right.
things that we can see, that we know is there. We don't have to have faith that it may be there. We rely on giving those things value. But beyond our lives, that lacks something deeper, that lacks something more intrinsically. And that was Nietzsche's criticism, is that humans are flawed that way, that we have like this, I can't remember the exact language, and Lena might have to help correct me on that one, but he says something, he says it a few times in the actual passage. I'll have to look at it, but he gives it a certain type of a criticism, saying that there's kind of a false hope or a false appreciation of what we give value in, because if there really is a God, for example, Bill, then there is something greater than us, that we need to have value in that faith, and that there is something after the human life. But most men, in Nietzsche's argument, only give value to things that are here in front of us. Ben and I were discussing on the phone before the show about materialistic things. I was going to ask a follow-up to Nathan earlier. Some of our listeners didn't get to hear before the show. Nathan is newly engaged. I know, Nathan, you said that you and your future significant other, were seeing each other for 2 years, but you brought this up before. For years that we worked together, you were trying to get back home. You were trying to get back home to go teach, and you had to consider your own value and the value of your family. But now, once you are married and that you have a stepson as well in the process, or maybe even your own kids later on someday, are you going to have to consider their value along with yours if you ever make a change again, right? Like you said earlier, your value evolves.
Yeah, you do got to take, and value, of the other side. And as we've all discussed that, we have looked at the other side. And then just like I said, you look at the other side, and then you have to decide, really, and you could put it in a sentence of saying, what path you're going to take. And you can change that words and go, what value or values are you either going to take in or set aside? So it's kind of one of those things that too, that especially with, with my fiance and her son, coming in, and also me being part of their family, is what path or what values am I going to keep or change?
Robbie, you brought up material possessions, and that leads us to Matthew 6:19-20, that said, lay up not yourself treasures upon earth, where moth or rust could corrupt them, or thieves could steal them, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. So there's another thought as far as material possessions.
Bill, can I kind of devil's advocate you? And by the way, I'm saying this with the utmost respect on this because I know how much of a collector you are, but three people in this room do not know the level of collector that you really are. So on, and this isn't me, but this is just kind of an understanding what you're trying to say from a secular perspective. I respect your reference to Matthew, but I will say is you are a tremendous collector of Indiana Hoosiers athletics. You have one of the best collections I've ever had. And I know that you value it, but I know as a religious individual, Bill, you have value for God and Jesus, but you also have value for your material possessions for Indiana. So to understand you as a good compromise, saying that, is it fair to value tangible, like materialistic things in your life? Just don't put them on the same level of value as a deity, as a God.
Oh, Robbie, that's a
fair?
great question. I love you playing devil's advocate there. That's wonderful. I love it. You know, I'll just take a second to explain my collection, and there's a couple other individuals that are friends of mine that part of our collection, and you know, Robbie, from my time with you guys with Hoosier United, that my collection is preserving. You know, there's going to be a time when I'm gone. I want my collection to go to some sort of museum or some sort of group of people where we have a continuation of the history of Indiana University. But you are absolutely right. If I were given the choice of having to make the choice between my collection and my faith is going to come first, because that's a permanent thing. And everything else that I have here, and you know, part of the joy of my collection is turning around and giving some of it away to different people along the way.
Yeah, I completely agree, Bill. Thanks for clarifying and sharing that with the three other people that didn't have as much knowledge. I like it because you like your life, because once your human life ends, you know an existence, a certain type of existence of you transcends the human life. So those material possessions won't mean anything anymore because that human life experience isn't there. I do want to toss something back over to Letha, just to give you a chance to lastly clarify. I love the discussion. I wouldn't necessarily say a debate, because I think you and Bill were seeing eye to eye on many things. Both of you had really good things to say. But Letha, just to clarify, before we add any more to this question, because I think I was debating with you earlier, but I think I understand where you were coming from now, that beyond humanity, like in the grander scheme of things, there really isn't value there. But in the human sense, here in our world where we exist, that we do give things value and give each other value. Is that a fair way to describe what you were trying, the conclusion you came
Yes.
to earlier? Am I understanding that? Great.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure. I
I did want to,
go ahead.
sorry. I did want to question Elena a little bit. I wanted to get your thoughts on all this. You've been quiet over there, and I just wanted to know, like, what are you thinking? Like, are you like, this lady is crazy? Or are you like, I don't know, ready to get off? No, I'm just kidding.
I see the point in the human life having no value, because even if you look at it from a religious standpoint, because you're all equal, so where does the value really fall? But I think then you also have to look at, you have to go back to like the Garden of Eden, and when sin was allowed in, that equality amongst humans kind of disappeared, and because of that, no longer saw each other as equals. We saw some of us as higher up and better, and others as, you know, slaves, or if somebody was poverty stricken, they were not equal to the person who was rich. And so we created that, we devalued ourselves and other people around us. And I think then when you look at the value of human life, you go back to, if God sees us all as equal, then we should value ourselves, creating everyone as equal. And the people who are considered beneath us, we should be the ones that go in and help raise them back up to being at the same level of equality as the rest of us. That way we are all still, I guess you're doing more of how you're seeing the world as how God sees us. If you're all equal, then you should try to treat people as if you're equal to them. And that's what gives value to human life, because when those people were devalued, it was your job as someone who was still valued to lift them up and bring them back into the value, and have the world see that there was still value there, to where everyone was equal, if that makes sense.
So you're saying if everyone was equal, they would have value?
If everyone was equal, the value would, I guess, be back to the same level, which goes back to if they're equal, then there is no value. So I think really the value comes into the fact that we're not equal. So as you're trying to get back to equal, you value the journey of getting back to equal. But then once you are all back to equal, the value is no longer really there, because there's nothing else to strive for.
Do you think that we could make someone else equal for the value so that they can do it for someone else? Is that what you're saying?
I think it's, like you have a chain
So it's like
reaction there.
Yeah, it's a forever going process.
Yeah, it kind of becomes a forever going process. And for the Christian, it would be an ever going process until, the rapture and everyone, ascends or whatever. That would be when the value isn't there anymore, because you're all on equal footing. So there really is no reason to have values.
I like what you said there. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for answering my question.
Hey, I'm thinking that we'll go about maybe another 10 or 15 minutes and we'll call it a night, but I do want to end on a pragmatic question. So something that's a little bit more practical. I know that this could be rather difficult, but I wanted to bring up something that I didn't talk to Ben or Letha about before the show, so it was brand new to everybody. One of my favorite speakers, but also just a TV personality, is a guy named Mike Rowe. Some of you may remember him from an old TV show called Dirty Jobs. Mike Rowe is great, but he was on recently on Ben Shapiro and some other shows, and he was asked a question about essential workers. So after the COVID-19 thing started going and the quarantine hit, remember when you saw the government released like a list of companies and jobs that would be considered essential? And then all of a sudden you started seeing certain people were labeled as essential workers and certain people were considered non-essential workers. And, me and Mr. Davis and Letha, we're all in this battle right now ourselves as teachers, that all of our school systems are trying to figure out, do we go to school or do we not go to school? Lena, as a student, does she take online classes or does she go to school? And we know that there's a risk of people getting sick, people spreading a virus, uncertainty, there's identity politics involved, blah, blah, blah. But either way, this all comes down to the value of the human life. So that over the last 4 months, our economy has been taking a hell of a hit. So as each week passes by, as each month passes by, you get to see people more divided over, do we just send everybody back to work and just risk it because we cannot let our societies economically and socioeconomically fail, even though we know that that could cause a rise again and could cause people immune compromised or elderly to they could get sick and they could die from it. But you can't let the society collapse. Or do you value human life to the point where you shut everything down and try to protect it, even though the economy might come at a risk? So, I guess what I'm asking you all is, Mike Rowe had stated that that was a dangerous road to go down. When you start having the government label people officially, if it's essential or non-essential, it becomes kind of dangerous when you start using certain language that way. And it could cause people to value their own jobs and their own lives differently. So I guess the last question I toss up to all five of you is, what should we do? And I know none of us are politicians, none of us are in the government, but as you know, people on social media like to complain because it's easy to point out problems, but nobody has the solutions. Like nobody's bringing up actual solutions to the problems. So if it's so easy for everybody, then where is the compromise? Because the truth is somewhere in there. So I guess what we're kind of getting to here is, when it comes to the value, considering the value of the human life and many lives, what should we do about getting, I guess, getting back to normal, some type of a new normal or some type of that? What is the most utilitarian route to take that will be the best for the majority of Americans?
Do you guys care if I start? Or go ahead.
Sorry,
Letha,
go ahead, Ben.
No, I'm just going to go ahead.
Okay, so I think the route that we're taking right now, just as a society, it's going. I mean, like, the world keeps turning, but I don't think that there's like a one way, this is what we should do. I mean, we're trying to all wear masks, but then we have the ones that don't want to wear masks because they think that it's a fake, it's a lie. But then look back and you sit back and you start thinking about it and you're like, but what if it's not? Like, what if, like, you get it and then give it to, I don't know, your grandmother or someone in your family who has cancer or someone who's just immunocompromised and everything. Are we just going to take that risk? Are we going to take that chance? And there are people who are, and to me, I don't know, it just sickens me to think there's someone out there. Actually, there are multiple people out there who will rather, I mean, to each their own. I mean, I work at I have two jobs. I'm a sub, and then I am also at the school, and then I am also work at Hudson in corporate as a receptionist. I'm a receptionist, and I've seen people come in and be like, "Oh, well, let me go get my mask or whatever," and then they're fine. But then I haven't come into contact with someone who says no yet. But there's people who I see in Walmart who get turned away, and they're like, "You have to put your mask on," and they're like, "No," and they're like, "Okay, we can't serve you," and they're like, "Okay," and they just leave. To me, how hard is it just to wear a mask to come in 15 minutes of shopping, or better yet, order online, like get your stuff delivered to your car if it's such a big deal? Like, I don't know, to me it baffles me by what people do. It's not like we're out of options, like it's a phone call away or whatever. I know my grandmother, she has COPD, and she's having to make phone calls to, like, I'm sure she's making phone calls to these businesses and saying, "Hey, I need this and this. Would you mind grabbing it and bringing it out to my car?" And then, of course, it being such a small town, people are like, "Oh yes, we'd love to. We don't want to put you at risk," and such. So, but she's also a social creature as well and wants to get out and like do things and visit people and actually say hello and have human contact. And I don't know, it's just insane to me. I think we're working with what we have in the moment right now. And right now it's one step at a time. And what that one first step here at least is wearing masks in public. Even if it's not 100% foolproof, it's still going to lower your percentage of getting it. So I don't know. Go
Can I
ahead, Ben.
jump in real quick? Well, one of the things that stood out to me, what you said, Letha, was like step by step. And literally you have to baby step back into this process. But I think before you take any steps, what I was going to comment on was just the base foundation of what Robbie was saying there, that a lot, I think, no, I don't want to say a lot of people, but there's people that will lose sight of that. I tend to say this a lot on my podcast, or our podcast. I'm sorry, Robbie. But I use the big picture mentality a lot of times. And whenever you mention the labeling of essential employees, and again, mine's probably more of a bias for personal view, just because we were part of that manufacturing core that was considered essential. Again, we're not in the medical field. We're not a power company. We're not someone that does water treatment, things like that I consider extremely critical to essential to society. But I think in the big picture, whenever they label these different companies or different employees, it's, if you just, again, like, make a knee-jerk decision or reaction to it, it can kind of sound offensive. But I think you lose clarity in that if you don't take time to stop and slow down and really think about what they're trying to say there, because obviously the magnitude of the situation is so extreme that we have to take extreme measures and sacrifices to try to take control of the situation. And the only way forward is to try to get back to a sense of normalcy, but you're wanting to baby step back into that. You don't want to just open the doors wide open and let everybody go out and do their thing. And it's not I don't think it's meant to be individually disrespectful to anybody when it comes to that labeling. Like, it's kind of saying, I'm trying to use a good example, and again, not to be offensive, but someone that was considered non-essential and then they had to stay at home. I don't think they should take it as in the sense that they or less valuable to society just because they were labeled non-essential. You have to think, okay, we're going through this right now, but who's to say that in the long run, in 2021, we get through this and we're able to move past it as a society on a very constructive level, both economically and socioeconomically, like you mentioned earlier, Robbie. So it's again, it's just remembering those sacrifices. Like can I just give, I don't mean to ramble on further, but I just would like to share like a personal mentality for me is when I say big picture, you instantly probably want to think of the future, but you don't want to forget the past. Bill will really appreciate this one a lot because he's a big historian buff. But for me personally, if I was labeled essential and a lot of people had done to it, you end up in a situation where you still need some kind of financial assistance. So there's people that have to go on unemployment or things of that nature. And that's only useful to a certain extent or for a certain amount of time. But like for me, I was one of those people that was relieved that I didn't have to not only affect me on my job on a long-term level, but we've actually been I guess you want to say as a business perspective, we've been very successful just because surprisingly, even to my own, that people still want cabinets in their homes. And it's crazy how much business we're getting. But I see it as a sense that I'm extremely grateful for that because I don't want to personally become dependent on unemployment. There's things that I've worked too hard over the 16 years I've been in manufacturing to, get the new truck that I have or pay for the roof that I just got put on my house, because to me, those are essential, valuable things to me that I have to pay on. And I can't do that by just being in a situation of like in limbo basically within your career. But again, I think my main point being here is Letha made great points too. But the thing I think the mentality is, yes, we do have to get back to a certain level on a utilitarian, on a decision based on going back to more normalcy. It has to be step by step because we do eventually have to get there, because as a society in general, we've worked too hard and come too far to just let everything crumble, if that makes any sense at all. Bill, did just to get you involved in here too, what do you think of those responses and any thoughts on your end?
I think the responses are well thought out. I think there's no, just like in many questions, there's no exact answer that we can put into this. I know people who are hurting because their jobs are they're unemployed right now, and it's really putting a lot of pressure and a bind on them. It's interesting what we consider essential and non-essential right now. I don't feel like that I have the Solomon wisdom to decide what is essential and non-essential right now myself, but I think it's a very interesting question. I think whatever we do, we have to try to come together as a country and help each other out. I think that's the thing that I've been really pleased to see is the number of people who have put food and other supplies for people who are out of work right now. I think that's the American spirit that we want to retain. So I'm not smart enough to have an answer. I'm really not, but that's what I see.
Bill, that's you make a good argument just because, and a good point, because this is one of the reasons why metaphysical arguments tend to be so difficult. Because you brought up, Nathan brought up logical ways. I mean, there are ways to put value on things like money and quantity and geography. There's many things to put value on, but when you put value on something like hope or human life, it can be very metaphysical. So there's not, like Bill, you're saying, there's not an exact science to really fall back on to have necessarily an exact answer for that. We were just discussing before we close tonight is there's so many other topics that could have came up in this. I know over the last year and a half, as Letha and Ben knows, that I've lost 2 former students to suicide. One was a current student, and then one was a former student, and that still also goes back to the value of human life as well too. And I want our listeners to know that I'm sure in comments and whatnot, there's probably so many other topics that we could bring into this discussion. We only have about an hour, hour and a half, or 2 hours to really go. So we're just trying to bring up as much as we can and try to get a general idea. So I think this is a fair time to kind of close it out tonight for our first roundtable discussion. I just want to do a closing thoughts segment and just go around the room to each of you and just kind of get your thoughts on really what did you think of the first roundtable discussion? What did you think about being on the podcast? And just some of the other guests. If there's any meaningful things that kind of stuck with you tonight that you would like to say to anybody else in the chat, this gives you the platform to really say it. So Ben, I'm going to start with you. You're my twin brother. We shared a room together for 9 months. Why don't you give me some feedback? You let me know, what was this experience like to be in your first roundtable?
Well, it was, I know this isn't my first appearance on your podcast show, but it's been a little while, and it was fun to just get back in the saddle again and be a part of the group. This roundtable discussion idea was fantastic. I knew when I saw your show plan that it was just mainly based off one question, one topic in general, and it went the whole show and then some. And I made the comment in chat that it can go on for a few hours more because there's so many different avenues we've all mentioned that we didn't really go down. Like you mentioned, depression or suicide being topics of different avenues you can take there. All very interesting. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was great to connect with Bill and Letha again, and it was really good to see Nathan again. I know it'd been a long time, and then Elena, it's also an honor to get to meet you and another one of Robbie's former students. I'm sure it's still a little bit of a shell shock to get used to seeing the twins thing, but at the same time, I really enjoyed the conversation, so thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, Elena can now tell her friends that she's actually met Malcolmson's twin and had a full conversation with him. But Ben, I appreciate you being on the podcast. It's an honor to share the sports podcast with you, but it's always cool to find some kind of an opportunity to get you on. Letha, another strong regular on the show. This is also the first roundtable one we did. Same question to you, just kind of what stuck with you tonight. Any comments or anything you would like to say to anybody else that was in the conversation? And just anything important you would like to share.
I loved this. Like, I love doing this. Of course, this reminds me of your little Socratic circles that you do with your classes, Robbie. But I want to say one thing. Kudos to Elena. Thanks for putting up with all this. Like, but mainly the one response that you had about the secret garden and stuff. I wasn't expecting you to bring that up at all, honestly. And then when you did, I was like, oh, this is good information. But then whenever I was like thinking that, I was like, where were you whenever that happened? And I was like, maybe I might have just not have given you a chance to even say it. But that's something that I have to work on. But yeah, I really liked being a part of this. Again, it was a pleasure, Bill. As you know, we talked before on another podcast. And I loved going back and forth with you. And then, of course, I always go back and forth with Robbie all the time. So I don't even have to thank you. So, no, I'm just kidding. But also it was a pleasure with Ben and then Nathan as well. Thank you guys for joining, actually sitting down. I honestly couldn't even imagine a better circle to start off with. This was a really good conversation, and it was very wholesome and genuine. I really liked that. Everyone brought up really great ideas and their own thoughts, and some of you tried to sway me, I want to think, but and then no, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I really do appreciate you guys, and it was a pleasure. So thank you.
Thank you, Letha. And I completely agree with what you said about Elena. She brought up multiple good points through the whole podcast, and it was great because, like I told her in the chat earlier, your first time doing a podcast, you've never done one before, it can be a little bit anxious, and it just takes a little bit to get comfortable. But the more you do this, the better you get at them. Bill, just kind of go over to you just to kind of finish up on one of the other regular ones. I'm excited because Letha's been on a podcast with you before, but we're excited about the weekend because Saturday night we get to go to Bloomington, Indiana, near where you're at, and we get to meet you in person for the first time. I've known you for over a year, so me, Ben, and Letha get to do that. So we're looking forward to that. But Bill, same questions to you too. What did you think about being on the podcast, and just any thoughts that you would like to share about anybody that was in the conversation with you?
Well, first of all, Robbie, thank you. It is always a pleasure to talk to you. To everyone else, I really value everything that you said. Letha, I really enjoyed our back and forth. It was a lot of fun. I love that type of banter. I really do. Of course, Ben, always love talking to you. We've been doing this for a long, long time. Nathan and Elena, it was nice to meet you both. You had wonderful insights as well. Humbled to be with the four of you and to hear what you had to say. And it's really always a pleasure. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
Well, you're welcome, Bill. And again, it's always an honor to have you on. And any time that you're available, you're always welcome to be on the show. Especially like doing another roundtable discussion again. It'd be great to have you, Nathan. I'm gonna go to you next, man, because it's weird. Because believe it or not, it's as you said before the show, it's been 5 years since you and I have actually like did more than just message over Facebook, but we're getting down to actually have a thoughtful and meaningful conversation. A lot's changed in both of our lives that since that 5 years have gone. But what really surprised me today, because you've always been a charismatic speaker and a teacher to me, and an influence on me as a teacher too. But it surprised me when you told me that tonight would be your first ever like podcast. So we broke the mold on that particular thing. So Nathan, the same questions and chance for you to be on a platform. What did you think about the whole roundtable discussion, and any feedback you'd like to provide to anybody that was in here with you?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it tonight. Like I said, I appreciate everyone. And the appreciation comes to, the whole topic of it was a discussion, not a debate. It was a discussion. And I truly like that. I guess from the Midwestern values, it was like talking around a bonfire. So it was very nice to hear other people's thoughts. Put perspective, definitely put perspective, or put perspective to the face or the voice of that human being. So, like I said, I appreciate. Hopefully, I brought some topics or your points to tonight, and it was definitely a first of a podcast, and I hope just from tonight, I hope there's many more to come.
Yeah, I was just about to ask you that as a follow-up, if you'd be willing to come back again.
Most definitely. Like I said, it's nice to let your, I guess, opinion to be heard, but also too to hear other opinions to either contradict you or even put maybe more faith in your own opinion in that situation.
Well, just to build off of what you said and what Bill said earlier in the show, mainstream media will lead us to believe that we're extremely divided and that we cannot have open dialogue together. But I think that's very misleading. I think that, the majority of us would do the right thing and actually do care about each other. I'm going to reference someone that Bill and Ben know, another fellow Indiana podcaster named Jared Morris, who has a show called Assembly Call. He had a social media post a few weeks ago. I don't know if Bill saw it, from Bloomington, Indiana, where a woman's car broke down and you saw a black man, a Hispanic woman, and a white man help them push their car to the side of the road and help them out. And he shared that on social media. And I'm just saying, in a certain situation, I think that all of us would help each other out and actually do care for the well-being of each other. And we're not as divided as, identity political media on either side would lead us to believe, that we're just on the verge of a civil war, of a race civil war at any moment. I think that they make everything out to be a race, and it just doesn't have to be like that at all. But Nathan, I really appreciate you being on the show. It was a really honor, and especially on such a short notice. I was just so glad we were able to do this, and hopefully have you back again soon. Elena, you're the caboose of the whole relationship. You're the end. So when I am with you, I have to say, first of all, proud of you, not just because of your opinions, but I'm also proud of you that, you were the only one in the conversation that's coming from that recent former student experience, and you thought there's going to be probably more people your age in here, and you were surprised to see that everybody was older than you when you came into the chat. But I thought you handled your own really well through the whole process. So I have to know, just like we said with Nathan earlier, would you want to come back again? What did you think of being on the show? And is there anything that you would like to say to anybody that was in here with you in this discussion?
I would definitely like to come back again. It was nice talking to people and hearing other opinions different than mine. I enjoy discussing things. I enjoy learning new points of views and seeing other sides of things. And I was it was very interesting, and I got a lot out of it.
Well, I'm glad you did. And again, I think that by the end, we all got something out of this that we didn't really think about before. And that's what I was hoping to do, is just get different sides of the whole valuable thing. And then, Ben, you wanted to ask a question at the very end here,
Well,
because I know you
mainly
said in the chat. Go ahead.
No, you're probably going to touch on this at the end, Robbie, but this is mainly directed to you because we were talking about it over chat. But this round table discussion idea, I think I can speak for everybody in here that we all thoroughly enjoyed this experience. But for you, being the brains behind the operation, having the idea, does this inspire you to want to do this more often?
Yeah, actually, and I should have mentioned it earlier. Letha brought up, this is similar to what I do in class. Back when Mr. Davis and I were teaching together, he knows that I started the Socratic seminar discussions where you sit in a circle like Alcoholics Anonymous, and you kind of have discussions that way. And Elena got the really big experience of that, because that was right in the middle where I was really starting to do that all the time. And to be honest with you, we can't be in front of each other in person right now. So these Zoom meetings, I'm trying to make them feel like we're all in a circle. And I'm sure Elena could attest. I'm nothing against her classmates back then. In any grade, whether it's freshman year or junior year or anything like that. I'm sure it's refreshing to Elena to actually sit with other adults and have a Socratic seminar with adults, and not just with other high school like-minded people, because you're talking with other people with you that have a greater scope of life beyond just your local community. And I think that's really refreshing to do that. Ben, I do enjoy this. And in fact, part of doing this show is trying to find my niche, and kind of like how we did in our sports podcast. And maybe the roundtable thing is something I should do more often, or maybe even become the most prominent thing of the show, is just trying to get people together and actually have conversations focusing on one question at a time, instead of just trying to do too much in one episode. So I appreciate that advice.
Well, on top of that, too, you did a good job of getting a great variety of people in here, because you got people of different generations in here. No offense to you, Bill. It sounds kind of insulting. But,
Elena and I are bookends here.
Yeah. We have a survivor of the Titanic here with us tonight. All the way from 1912, we have Bill Murphy. No, it's okay. He knows we're messing with me. I'll buy a bill of beer Saturday night and make up for it in the whole process. But anyway, we're really glad. And again, just to close up the show, it meant a lot to me that all five of you could be on here, especially since it was just such a short notice. And most of the time you would have the agenda a week before we'd actually do it. So you can do your own kind of research and your own thoughts coming into this. But I can't wait to do another one. I know we're going to do a movie and a video game coming up soon, but I look forward to doing another roundtable discussion. So to our listeners, we appreciate you investing your time in us at all. And as always, keep your mind and your eyes open and be contagious. Have a great night.